Okay, we're going to talk about the three main ways to debloat your face that actually work. I remember when I had a face that looked like I was a sumo wrestler after a night of Taco Bell eating 7,000 milligrams of sodium. And I tried to find a lot of information on debloating the face, and a lot of it was weird temporary type of stuff. And so I wanted to make this video to give the top three ways to reduce that facial bloat that actually worked for me. So the three things I'm going to talk about are: number one, masseter Botox; number two, weight loss; and number three, debloat. So let me start with masseter Botox. So no one really talks about this in relation to facial bloat, but it actually has one of the biggest impacts, in my opinion, depending if you have the masseter muscle that is high set or not. And so, first of all, what is masseter and what is Botox? Not to scare you, but Botox is separate from filler, first of all. So you see those pictures of celebrities go from, this nice young looking lean face to this really bloated weird look. That is filler. Botox does not add any volume to the face. Botox is simply freezing the muscle, what's called atrophying the muscle, which is basically deactivating that muscle so that it can relax. So that's why you'll see people put it in their forehead, around specific areas where they don't want the muscle to activate in order to decrease the wrinkling. Now, what does this have to do with facial bloat? That's where the masseter muscle comes into play. So the masseter muscle sits right upon this side of each face. It's a pretty big muscle that kind of goes across the edge here. So if you were to like flex as if you're chewing something in the mirror, I have masseter Botox, so you can see like I can't really activate the muscle. Now, there's a very, very important distinction to acknowledge here. There are high set masseters and low set masseter muscles. And so the logic is, if you have a low set masseter muscle, that's actually going to improve the look of your jawline. So because let me start here. In order to have a hollow cheek kind of effect, there's kind of a triangular trifecta that goes on here. So triangular trifecta, genius with wordplay. So you have your cheekbone, you have your chin projection, and then you have your jawline. That's kind of a triangle, if you imagine, that will determine how hollow your cheeks are. And so if you have low set masseter muscle, that's actually going to push out your jawline, which looks good in terms of that triangle I just mentioned. Now, if you have high set masseters, this is where the masseter, which I had, which sits kind of right here, by overworking that muscle, you're actually causing more bulk in your face. So a lot of people that, especially men have more muscle in that masseter area, but I've seen huge before and after differences with women. That muscle of the masseter is sitting underneath your skin, and you may think, oh, I'm losing a lot of weight. I just don't understand why my face still looks so bulky. That masseter muscle could be very, very strong, and it's pushing out the bulk of your face. And so if you do have that high set masseter that primarily sits right here, putting Botox into that muscle, obviously done by a doctor, and I can recommend who and what type of doctor, but doing that is going to atrophy that muscle and reduce a lot of the bulk in the face, and will kind of bring that leanness into the profile, where even if you've optimized your weight loss, which we'll talk about, optimized debloat, which we'll talk about, you may still have some of that bulk. So I wanted to start with that one because that's kind of a lesser known one. And in terms of who can perform this, the best person to perform this is actually a dentist. So dentists are very familiar with the facial structure, and so they'll actually perform this as well as part of their practice. And so I went to a dentist to perform this, and you basically have to flex that muscle it's like a really tiny needle, like less than an insulin needle, and they'll inject a small amount of Botox into that muscle to atrophy it. And I also, if you have TMJ, which is essentially jaw pain, this is massive because masseter Botox actually helps the functionality of reducing that TMJ. So not only are you reducing your jaw pain, you're also helping, if you have high set masseters, the aesthetic look. So it is very, very huge ROI, and that's why it was the first one on the list. Now, second one is weight loss. So if you're not familiar with this already, hopefully you know that you cannot have any targeted weight loss. So you can't like do these facial exercises to target loss of fat on a particular region. You need to have an overall body fat loss. And what I want to emphasize is that what I noticed, and obviously this is going to change based on genetics, but in general, and what I noticed in terms of facial fat is that is the last area to leave the face. And it's the first one to come back when you get fat again. So it's in the worst spot because you get fat and the first thing you get is bulky face. When you lose weight, you get lean everywhere else, and the face is that last piece. And that's why the change from 20% body fat to 15% body fat is so dramatic in the face, because that face area is the last to leave. So I had thought, like, I remember when I was like maybe 25% body fat, I had visible abs, and I'm like, why is my face so bulky and so fat? And it's because I wasn't dialing in hard enough to get to that 15%, and ideally that 12%, 10%. Now, closer to 10%, you have the risk of shutting down your hormone profile, so your testosterone profile, and it's overall going to be a net loss for you. And so you want to avoid shutting down your endocrine system. But a healthy range, obviously, with still maintaining a good diet and obviously doing this slow, right? We don't want to lose 10 pounds a week, 5 pounds a week, 1 to 2 pounds a week at most. That way you can keep your endocrine profile in check. You can stay healthy, keep your lean muscle mass, and lose just the excess fat. We don't want to lose all the hard work you put in to gain the muscle. But getting to that, from that 20 to 15 to 12% is a dramatic difference in the face. So if you're right at that 20 and you're like, hey, I don't understand why the face is not moving, get to that next level of the 12% safely, and it's going to be a huge ROI in terms of the facial leanness. Okay, and then the last method is what's called debloat. So a big misconception here is that, oh, I don't want to have a fat face and a lot of bloat in my face, so I'm going to drink less water, which is actually the opposite of what you want to do. The more water you drink, the more your body will actually flush it out. Because what the body is saying when you're feeding it 2 to 3 gallons a day, it's like, hey, I'm no longer in survival mode of needing water. I'm actually getting so much water every single day, I can start to flush this out. So you're actually training your body to start flushing out the water by drinking more water. It sounds counterproductive, but that's how the body works. And so by starving yourself of water, the body is like, oh my gosh, it thinks we're in the Sahara Desert and we need to retain this water. And that's when you get the water retention, and now you look bloated. And so you actually want more water. I target around 2 gallons to 3 gallons at most per day, in order to get the body to kind of cycle through that water and understand that, hey, we are very hydrated and we don't need to retain all this. The other thing is your ratio of sodium to potassium. So this is actually massive. So our diets nowadays are so high in sodium, all the processed foods that we eat, and not very high in potassium. So potassium are things found in food, primarily like a potato, sweet potato, russet potato, bananas, things you hear like that with potassium. And so it's actually, the goal you want to get to is a 4-to-1 potassium to sodium ratio. For example, if you were to eat a meal, which is very typical, like let's say you get McDonald's or something, it's probably like 2 to 3,000 plus milligrams of sodium in that. And so you would need 3 to 4x times that in potassium. So you need 4,000 milligrams of potassium for every 1,000 milligrams in sodium. So you might ask, that sounds impossible to do. And it basically is with the normal diet, unless you're extremely dialed in. So what do you do to counteract that? You use a supplement called potassium chloride. And now I warn you very carefully up front, taking too much of this will cause you to die. So this is not a joke to play around with. You can actually die from having too much potassium in the system. So this is no joke here. You actually need to measure the potassium you take with a jeweler scale, because it is so fine that, and this is what a jeweler scale looks like, by the way. It's like for measuring the weight of jewelry. Because if you were just to measure like with a scooper, the concentration of the powder can vary so much and be off by such a small amount that you can overdose. And so I don't advise, if you're not going to be dialed in and you're not going to take it seriously, I don't take potassium chloride. But if you're taking it very seriously and you're actually taking the diligence to use a jeweler scale and measure out, hey, I need my extra, for example, extra supplementation of 2000 milligrams of potassium, then there is a smart way to do it. So when I was using the supplemented potassium, let's say I would eat a huge sodium meal, right? A lot of pizza, or I had like a cheat day or whatever, then I would supplement 2,000 milligrams of the powder potassium, which translates to 1,000 of actual elemental potassium chloride. So I would do that around 2 times a day. So overall, I'd get 2 to 4,000 milligrams of the powder, which translates to 1 to 2,000 milligrams of actual elemental potassium chloride, which helps kind of get my ratio in more line. Not a perfect 4-to-1, but at least it gets me better than a normal diet would in the modern American era. So yeah, the potassium to sodium ratio is huge, because what happens with too much sodium is that sodium is retaining that water in the body. The potassium is doing the opposite, helping to flush that out. And so again, I want to warn you, if you're doing the supplemented potassium, be very careful. Use a jeweler scale and do not overdose. I'd rather take a conservative approach and also dial in the diet to begin with. Don't, like, if you're really trying to take Debloat seriously, you really shouldn't be eating a bunch of high sodium foods. So it's easier to eat less sodium overall than have to make up for it with a ton of potassium supplementation, which can become dangerous. And so that's been my top 3 ROI ways to debloat. You've got your number 1, masseter Botox, not really talked about, super underrated, but super high ROI. You've got your, obviously, overall weight loss, which getting to that 12% body fat makes an astronomical difference from the 20%, 25%, where you may think, oh, I'm already lean. You might be missing out on some extra leanness. And then lastly, the debloat, 2 to 3 gallons of water a day, ideally. Get your potassium to sodium ratio in line with that 4-to-1 ratio. I know it's hard with the modern American diet. Now you can supplement, but be very careful as you're doing so. And these 3 things are going to help give you the most ROI in terms of facial leanness. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.